Whenever you're ready, Ema.
Okay.
Screen me up. Anyway, we are halfway through the inputs on the creation myths of the countries that Sessa visited. And while we call them creation myths, I think one of the things that in some ways might be deduced from the stories we've heard is that we're also learning about those forces and energies that actually destroy culture. Because one thing I think perhaps came out of the last week is that if you visit appalling cruelty on the goddess that has created culture, she's unlikely to sit there back and take it. And I think we saw that with Gaia's reaction to Uranus and Rhea's response to Kronos. And then the week before, we saw the dismemberment of the goddess in the form of Tiamat, and by the strongman Marduk. And the week before, we saw the one we're all familiar with, which is how Eve, in tasting the fruit, the forbidden fruit in the Garden of Eden, could be deemed to be the temptress that got humanity cast out. So far, the way the women are portrayed in these creation myths is hugely questionable. But anyway, maybe we're in for something different. And today we have Fiona and the Egyptian creation myths and characters that you may be familiar with, Isis and Osiris. So this week is into the extraordinary Egyptian culture and their extraordinary creation myths. So over to you, Fiona, and we look forward to the Egyptian creation myth.
Okay, when you're ready, Fiona. You're muted. You have to unmute first.
This is the story of Egypt and the gods of Egypt. And we'll start out with the creation. So in the beginning, there was nothing but none, N-U-N. This was the primal ocean of chaos and darkness, but it contained the seeds of everything to come. And in the jumble of these waters, the sun god, Ra, reposed. And finally, by an exertion of pure will, he emerged from the chaos and he gave birth to Shu and Tefnut by himself. Now, Shu was the god of air and Tefnut, the goddess of moisture. And they in turn gave birth to Geb and Nut. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing these, but I'm giving it a good go. Who were the earth god and the sky goddesses. That's Shu, or Geb and Nut. And thus the physical universe was created. Now men were created from Ra's tears. And eons passed, like hundreds of thousands of years, and Ra grew quite old and decrepit and very cranky. And he became annoyed because the race of men were plotting to overthrow him. Under Ra's gaze, there wasn't prosperity, things were tough, man was pitted against man, they were living without any culture, and their instincts were quite base. Now Ra was annoyed with this, so he called a council of the gods in order to take mankind in hand. And they agreed that mankind should be just wiped out. And so Ra elected Hathor, who was the goddess of destruction, an early goddess of destruction, to take revenge on man, and she did her best, and she, bit by bit, was doing away with mankind. And eventually Ra relented, and he spared the remnant, which was quite small. But he was sick and tired of being the god of everything, so he retreated into heavens, and he left Shu, the god of air, to be in his place. And at that time, the world, as we know it, had been established. Now, Ra was very clear that Shu and Tefnut, the god of the sky and the god of the earth, would not have children because the god of knowledge and scripture, Thoth, had predicted that they would have a child who would rule the world. So he decreed that under no circumstances were the earth god Geb and Nut, the sky goddess, to have any children. He was extremely angry because they had married against his wishes. And he, in his wrath, he ordered the air god Shu to separate them. And that he did. He defeated Geb and raised Nut aloft permanently, and Nut became the sky, and Geb became the earth. However, Nut was already pregnant. But Ra saying that she couldn't have any children posed a problem because she could not give birth against Ra's orders. And so she went to Thoth, the god of learning, and asked for his help. And he in return said, well, if you love me, I think I can help you. And she freely gave her love to Thoth, and he went away to devise a plan. Now he was smart, very, very smart, and filled with magic. And Thoth decided, the decree was that in no day or no night of all the days of the year shall Nut give birth. So Thoth came up with a clever plan, which was to create more days. And he challenged the moon to a game of chance. Now the moon couldn't help herself, loved gambling, but hadn't realized that Thoth was quite so skillful. So as they were playing, she was losing more and more of her light. And Thoth managed to garner sufficient light to create 5 more days, which he tacked on to the 360 days that are already in existence, and therefore created 365 days, or managed to increase the calendar to contain 365 days. Now those 5 extra days gave Nut enough time to give birth. And in those days, she gave birth to Osiris, to Horus the Elder, which we're not going to talk about again, to Seth, to Isis, and to Nephthys. Now, Osiris was strong, he was good looking, he had jet black hair, he was upright. And both separated Isis and Osiris, brother and sister, and brought them up himself, or well, he tutored them, and he taught them all good and all knowledge and all magic. And they grew in wisdom and in beauty. The other 2, he kind of left to their own devices. So Nephthys and Seth grew under a different upbringing to Isis and Osiris. Osiris became the incarnation of good, while Seth took on darkness. He was addicted to chaos, wasn't pleased about light and good or anything like that. And therefore the 2 poles of, say, good and evil were created. Now, Osiris being tall and slender with jet black hair was very popular. And he fell in love with his sister, Isis, and they were well matched, and they made a blissful and beautiful union. And together they had seen how kind of rough mankind was, and they wanted to bring some stability and fruition. Isis discovered barley and wheat and grapes and fig and the means to cultivate them. And Osiris took on this information, and he established ways of farming. Now, there's a little backstory to this, which I'm going to tell you very briefly because it's a very, very long story. Isis wanted Osiris to be king, to take over from Shu. But she needed to defeat Ra in order to depose Shu and have Osiris become the king, the pharaoh, the earth god. So she had learned an awful lot of magic from Thoth and thought and thought and thought, because Ra was really a grumpy old man at this stage, and he wasn't even good at being the sun god at rising and setting effectively. So he was kind of a bit shambolic. And he was also prone to like fits of, you know, meanness. So Isis, in her wisdom, decided that Ra really had to be weakened. And she was told by Thoth that if she could find out all the names of Ra, there was one secret one. And if she was able to discover this secret name, she would get all of his power and magic, or much of his power and magic. So Isis, being Isis, who was a very clever goddess, tracked Ra as he rose in the morning and set in the evening. And as he went through the day, he was so old at this stage that he was dribbling, and all this spittle fell down. So she gathered the spittle and she created a beautiful cobra out of it and set the cobra on the path that Ra would take every day. So right enough, the next day, Ra gets up, he's doing his thing as God, sun god, and he passes by the serpent who strikes his heel, and he's in huge pain. And there's nothing within him, because this was not his creation. There was nothing within him that could change this or remove the pain. And it just got worse and worse. And he screamed out in agony and pain for all of the gods to help him. They all came, but nobody could help. And eventually Isis comes. She says, I think I can give you a hand here, sort this out for you. And he's like, well, just do it, just get rid of it. And she said, well, but you must tell me your names, because unless I know your names, I can't create the spell to heal. So eventually, after some toing and froing, he does give up his secret name and therefore his power. And Isis takes on this power. And at which point she bargains with Ra that Osiris should be given leadership of the world. And so it happened. Osiris is now in charge, and Isis is his queen. And between the two of them, with their knowledge and their love, and Isis had enormous compassion. She was the goddess of healing. She was the goddess of the harvest. And Osiris was filled with wisdom and strategy. And between the two of them, they were able to create and teach mankind how to live well, how to farm, how to create abundance, how to store things. And once they had learned how to maintain themselves physically, Osiris went on to teach them about truth, about civic behavior, how to live well, how to worship the gods, and so on. And so Osiris and Isis between them civilized their country, which was Egypt. And once Osiris had done that, he then set out to bring this knowledge and these tools to the rest of the world. And he left not with an army, but with a bunch of priests and some musicians. And he traveled around, and because the music was so charming and there was no ill will within this band, civilized people around the world became civilized. They easily took on his teachings and his knowledge. Now, while Osiris was away, he set Isis to be queen and to reign in his place, which is grand, except that his brother, Seth, who we met earlier, was dead against order and beauty, and he just embraced chaos. And he was insanely jealous of his brother. Now, Osiris was a bit of an ugly bastard as well. He had red, coarse hair like an ass's, like the skin of the hair in a donkey. And he had a kind of a grotty nature, so people didn't like him that much. And he was married to his sister, Nephthys. Now, they were barren, or Nephthys couldn't conceive with Seth. And they sort of fell out of love a bit. They were quite unhappy. So Seth was wise enough not to challenge Isis while Osiris was away. He knew he would find it very difficult to defeat her anyway. But in that time, he assembled 72 so-called friends who were keen to depose Osiris and put Seth on the throne. And so it happened that when Osiris eventually returned from civilizing the world, Seth had prepared a party, a great big feast. And what he had done is he had, by magic, acquired the exact measurements of Osiris's body and had created a beautiful casket made out of the finest wood, cedar wood, and decorated with beautiful colors and gold leaf. And he put this at the center of the chamber where they were having a party. It was a massive party. There was much feasting, praise of Osiris and songs and much, much alcohol. And eventually he declared that there was a prize for one of the guests tonight, but he did not know which one, because this was a special gift that he'd had fashioned with craftsmen over many weeks, and it would only be given to the person that it fit. So of course everyone put on a big show of trying to fit in, and some were too tall, some were too short, some were too fat, some were too skinny, some had bits missing and whatever. And finally Osiris said, sure, I'll give it a shot myself. And he got in himself and it fit like a glove. It was perfect. And he was thrilled. He said, oh my goodness, I love this. This is lovely. Thank you very much, Seth. At which point Seth slammed the lid shut, called his 72 fellow conspirators, and poured molten lead to seal the deal. And that is where we are going to leave. I'm sorry. And then they called their servants, picked it up and threw it in the Nile. Now, this is where we're going to leave the story for the moment, but it is to be continued.